Listener discretion advised. The first alarms didn't sound on an international flight board. They started in a small Texas city called Everman, where family members and neighbors kept asking the same question: where is Noel? He was 6 years old, medically fragile, and tiny for his age. A little boy who needed appointments, oxygen at times, and people paying attention. By late March of 2023, people who loved him were saying out loud that they hadn't seen him in months. Police went to check. His mother, Cindy Rodriguez Singh, gave them a simple answer. Noel was with his biological father in Mexico. It sounded tidy. It also wasn't true. Officers did what officers do. They called, checked, verified. There was no father and son reunion. There was no recent sighting. And then came the detail that would reframe everything. 2 days after that first welfare check, Cindy, her husband, and 6 of her other children boarded an international flight to India. Noel was not on it. Everman police moved fast. An alert went out. Detectives searched the family's property, the converted shed where the children had been living, the backyard, and an unpermitted concrete patio that had recently appeared. When the patio came up, specially trained dogs alerted to topsoil that had been underneath it. Anthropologists helped guide the excavation and evidence handling. The dogs later stopped alerting directly under the slab. But investigators said the pattern suggested human remains had been stored nearby. You don't say that lightly. You put it in a report because you think a court will need to hear it. By April of 2023, the case shifted from a missing child search to a death investigation. Officials described a child who had not been seen since the previous fall, after his mother gave birth to twins. Witnesses told investigators Noel appeared malnourished, that he was sometimes denied food or water, that his diapers weren't changed. Some said Cindy believed Noel was evil or possessed. Those accounts will be fought over in court, but in the moment, they gave shape to a picture that was already dark. A boy with special medical needs gone for months, a mother who fled the country, and a property search that raised the worst possibility. In October 2023, a Tarrant County grand jury indicted Cindy for capital murder of a person under 10. A federal warrant followed for unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. The state's accusation wasn't about a single terrible instant so much as a timeline. Months of absence, a string of false statements, and circumstantial evidence that pointed one way. And yet one fact kept the whole story aching and unresolved. Noel still hadn't been found. For most people, that's where the headlines fade. For agents and detectives, that's where the grind switches to international. You start with last known movements. In Cindy's case, the last confirmed sighting put her at an airport on March the 22nd, 2023, boarding a flight to India with her husband and 6 of her children. Agents built the profile around that. She was born in Dallas, 5'1" to 5'3", 120 to 140 pounds, brown hair and eyes, tattoos on her back, right arm, right hand, and both legs. She had ties to India and Mexico. You package those details because you might need the public to recognize a face on the other side of the world. That moment came on July 1st, 2025. The FBI added Cindy Rodriguez Singh to the 10 most wanted fugitives list, the 537th person to land there since the program began. The listing did 2 things at once. First, it told the world this case was a priority. A capital murder suspect accused of killing her 6-year-old son and fleeing the country. Second, it unlocked the Bureau's loudest megaphone. Posters in multiple languages, a dedicated wanted page, and a reward up to $250,000 for information leading to her arrest. If you've never watched a case step up onto that list, it isn't just publicity, it's logistics. Field offices coordinate with embassies and foreign partners. Tip lines go live, and analysts triage in multiple time zones. The wanted poster becomes the core of a public-facing story. A face, a set of scars and marks, a handful of places to look. Behind it, case agents work quietly on the parts that never make TV: financial traces, communications patterns, and the human web anyone builds, even when they're hiding. For Noel's family, and for the city that had been holding vigils without a gravesite, the 10 Most Wanted announcement felt like a turning point. It said the search had not gone cold. It said the boy's name had reached rooms where decisions were made about resources, priorities, and pressure. It also said something else the public rarely hears explicitly. In a no-body case, justice has to be built out of everything that remains. That can be digital records and interviews. It can also be the silences: no doctor visits, no school records, no photos after a certain month. When a child disappears, the absence of ordinary life becomes evidence too. There's a hard balance in telling this story. On one side, the state's allegations that Noel suffered severe ongoing neglect and abuse, that his mother lied about his whereabouts, and that she fled with 6 other children while the one who needed the most care vanished. On the other side, the presumption of innocence that belongs in every American courtroom. Both can be true at once. A tight case file and a legal system that requires proof beyond a reasonable doubt. This series will hold that line. We will say what officials have alleged and what they've documented. We will also say clearly that allegations are not convictions, and those decisions will come from a jury, not from us. But there's a line we can draw without fear of being unfair. This story is about Noel. It has to. He was 6, and he deserved ordinary things: appointments kept, meals made, the boring safety of a routine. When we talk about lists and logistics and international manhunts, it's easy to lose the child. Don't say his name. Remember that the urgency came from a boy who hadn't been seen since the fall of 2022, whose needs were complex, and whose voice had to be carried by people who noticed he was missing at all. By the time the FBI put Cindy's name on that list, the case had a shape the public could follow. A welfare check that revealed a lie, a family that flew without the one child who could not have traveled alone, a backyard search that raised the specter of hidden remains, an indictment for capital murder, a federal flight warrant, and an international hunt. The wanted poster added the last ingredient: pressure, and a reward big enough to shake loose tips from far away. What you're about to hear is drawn from real reports, interviews, and court documents. Listener discretion advised. The moment Cindy Rodriguez-Singh's face went up on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list, the case changed scale. A quiet local investigation in Everman, Texas became a global manhunt with one goal: find the mother accused of killing 6-year-old Noel and fleeing the country. The Bureau raised the reward to $250,000 and blasted her description in English, Spanish, and Hindi. 5'1" to 5'3", brown hair, brown eyes, tattoos across her back, legs, and right arm. Last confirmed sighting: boarding a flight to India on March 22, 2023 with her husband and 6 other children. Noel was not with them. Behind the poster was infrastructure most people never see. The FBI's Fort Worth team and the Longhorn Violent Crime Task Force handled the fugitive hunt stateside. Overseas, the FBI attaché in New Delhi and the International Operations Division worked channels that don't show up on TV: diplomatic notes, partner briefings, and tasking in places where U.S. agents don't carry the badge alone. Years earlier, when Everman officers first knocked on Cindy's door for a welfare check and heard she'd sent Noel to Mexico, investigators chased the lead and found nothing. By the time they realized she'd left for India, the search had 2 tracks: bring the mother back and keep looking for the child. The paper trail matched the urgency. A Tarrant County grand jury indicted Cindy for capital murder in October 2023. A federal warrant for unlawful flight followed days later. In 2024, an Interpol Red Notice went out, an international signal to member countries that a fugitive was wanted for prosecution. The 10 Most Wanted designation in July 2025 wasn't the start of the manhunt. It was the amplifier. It said loudly that the United States would spend the time and money it takes to deliver a suspect to a Texas courtroom. Tips began to move. Some were noise, some were recycled rumors. But a few had the ring of proximity. Details that suggested people had seen her life shrink, from the wide freedom of travel to the tight routines of hiding. Indian authorities, working with FBI liaisons, narrowed their focus. The Bureau kept its public statements spare. Then, in late August 2025, the news broke. Cindy Rodriguez Singh had been located in India, taken into custody, and placed on a path back to the United States. The return matters. Extraditions can take months or years when a country has to process a case through its courts. This one moved quickly. On August 21st, the FBI Dallas office announced she had been transferred back and booked into the Tarrant County Jail. The press release read like a checklist of partners who made it happen: the Government of India, the U.S. Department of State, the Attaché Office in New Delhi, the Bureau's international divisions, and the local teams who built the case when the world wasn't watching. The message was simple: justice has no borders. Booking in Fort Worth added new hard numbers to the file: capital murder of a person under 10. Federal unlawful flight. Bond set at a figure meant to hold her ins. Place, $10 million. The state case prosecutors said would now take the front seat. Finding Knowles' remains remained a priority, but the legal train had arrived at its next station: arraignment, motions, and a fight over what a jury will be allowed to hear. Officials stayed careful about how she was found. Some details may surface later: who tipped, which unit knocked, whether surveillance or a small mistake cracked the last layer of distance. For now, what's public is the architecture of cooperation and the timeline that carried her home. It began with a welfare check on March 20th, 2023, when a mother told officers a story that didn't survive verification. It hardened when flight records showed she and 6 other children left the country 2 days later. It intensified after indictment. And it reached full volume when the 10 Most Wanted poster multiplied across borders in 3 languages, with a reward big enough to shake loose the kind of information money can buy and conscience demands. At every step, the presumption of innocence remains. A poster is not a verdict. An arrest is not proof. The courtroom, not the news conference, decides what the state can prove beyond a reasonable doubt. But bringing a fugitive back answers one necessary question: will there be a courtroom at all? Now there will. And in that room, prosecutors will try to stitch together a bodiless homicide: medical histories and witness statements, timelines and data points, the long silence of a child who stopped appearing at clinics, in photos, or in the everyday places a 6-year-old should fill. What changes for Knowles' family and for Everman is harder to measure, but just as real. For more than 2 years, they've held vigils without a grave and listened to speculation take the place of answers. The arrest doesn't give them a resting place. It doesn't tell them the last moments in a shed behind a small house. It doesn't tell them if the ground searched and researched will ever give him back. But it does say that the person accused of causing his death and running from consequence is no longer a world away. It promises a process that can ask questions under oath with consequences attached to every word. You will hear officials speak in 2 registers from here. One is legal, dates, counts, hearings, and the choreography of a capital case. The other is moral. The duty to keep searching for a child's remains even when the case can move without them. The obligation to treat 6 surviving children like witnesses and victims, not just names on a passenger list. and the reminder that this case started and will end with a boy who needed care more than anyone else in that house. So where does the story stand at the end of this chapter? A suspect who vanished across an ocean is in a Texas jail. A $250,000 reward did what it was designed to do: force a fugitive's world to shrink until a door opened to law enforcement. International partners did the work that posters and press alone cannot do. And a small city that learned to light candles for a child it couldn't find now has one more reason to believe that a courtroom will try to speak for him. What you're about to hear is drawn from real reports, interviews, and court documents. Listener discretion advised. When a fugitive comes back in cuffs, the story shifts from where to what next. Cindy Rodriguez Singh is now in a Texas jail on a capital murder charge in the death of her 6-year-old son, Noel. The federal unlawful flight warrant did its job. It got her back. But from here on, the state case leads. That means arraignment, discovery, motions. The slow, methodical steps that decide what a jury will actually be allowed to hear. Capital murder in Texas is the state's highest charge. The possible punishments are life in prison without parole, or, if prosecutors elect to seek it and a jury agrees, the death penalty. That decision, whether to pursue death, doesn't happen in a press conference. It happens after prosecutors sit with the file, examine the law, weigh aggravating factors, consider mitigation, and think about the proof they can actually put in front of 12 people. If they don't seek death, life without parole is the automatic sentence on a capital conviction. This is also a nobody case, for now. Jurors may never see a recovery photo or hear a pathologist walk them through a post-mortem. Instead, they'll hear about a long silence. No clinic visits, no school records, no verified sightings after a certain month. They'll hear about interviews and timelines, device pings and camera pulls, and the kind of circumstantial proof that holds up because ordinary life leaves a trail. And Noel's stopped. The state will argue that the absence of normal evidence is evidence itself. Expect the earliest courtroom fights to be about what comes in. One bucket is prior statements and conduct. Witnesses who told investigators that Noel looked malnourished, that he was denied food or water, that diapers went unchanged, that his mother called him evil. Another bucket is the property search, cadaver dog alerts on soil and a rug, the unpermitted patio poured over ground where those dogs first hit, the anthropologist brought in to make sure the digging was done right. Defense attorneys will challenge all of it. They'll say some witnesses are unreliable, that a dog's alert is not a body, that any greenhouse gases plus time explanation could mislead a jury, and that inflammatory language about beliefs or alters has more shock value than probative value. Those are classic evidence code arguments, prejudice versus proof. Judges hear them every day, but in a case like this, those rulings are the trial. The prosecution will counter by tying each contested piece to a larger chain. One witness standing alone can be fragile. 10 witnesses across months, supported by digital records, is a different thing. A dog alert by itself proves nothing. A dog alert plus a timeline plus a freshly poured slab can add up to a conclusion a jury is allowed to draw. The state will also work to convert narrative into record. Not somebody said, but this person will take the stand and say it under oath. Juries are often asked to resolve competing expert claims in no-body cases. You may hear pediatricians explain how chronic neglect can be fatal without a single dramatic moment. You may hear digital forensics analysts testify about handset exports, tower maps, or location histories that put devices somewhere they shouldn't be, or show them conspicuously silent when they should have been active. You may hear about purchases or searches that don't fit a normal week caring for a medically fragile child. For the defense, seems always. This is where alternative narratives are made. accidental injury masked by panic, misinterpretations of data, a third party's involvement, any explanation that seeds reasonable doubt about intent, timing, or cause. Bail is set at a number designed to hold the defendant in place: $10 million. That figure says something practical. The court wants this case to proceed without another chase. In the background, the federal flight case can wait. It's leverage if needed. But the capital charge is the main event. If the defense moves to reduce bond, the state will likely cite the flight risk already proven by an international escape and the severity of the charge. Even with a suspect in custody, the search for Noel does not stop. Recovery matters for families and for prosecutors. A body can answer questions that data cannot, but the case can move without it. Texas has tried no body homicides before, and juries are instructed that circumstantial evidence is not second-class proof. The issue is not whether each piece points to guilt by itself. The issue is whether, together, the pieces leave a reasonable doubt. You'll also see litigation around statements made during the initial welfare check days. Officers say Cindy first told them Noel was with his biological father in Mexico. Investigators later determined that wasn't true. The defense might argue those contradictions are hearsay unless the officers testify and can be cross-examined. The state will call those officers not because the jury needs every detail of a conversation, but because lies about a child's location can show consciousness of guilt. The judge will decide how much of that the jury hears. Another front: the 6 children who flew to India with their mother. They are not just names on a manifest, they are potential witnesses and victims. The court will have to balance the need for testimony against their privacy and well-being. Expect motions for protective orders, closed hearings on certain issues, and tight control over how their words, if any, reach the jury. The point in a victim-first system is not to turn children into exhibits. On the public safety side, you may hear officials use this case to push for policy changes: stronger probation oversight in high-risk households, faster escalation when medically fragile children drop off the grid, tougher scrutiny of sudden construction over search-relevant areas. Those are not evidence. They're aftermath. But they matter because the systems that failed one child are often asked to protect the next one. When a case like this triggers better checklists and faster flags, that's also a kind of justice. Procedurally, here's the road you can expect: an arraignment to enter a plea and set the early calendar, a series of pre-trial hearings where both sides argue about admissibility and scope, discovery flowing in batches, reports, videos, lab submissions, device exports, followed by defense motions to compel anything they believe is missing. If prosecutors seek death, a formal notice to that effect. If they don't, preparation for a capital trial where life without parole is the only possible sentence. If the jury returns, guilty. Alongside all of that, continued searches in places investigators have identified but not disclosed. Because some work needs quiet to succeed. Through every step, the presumption of innocence stays where it belongs. An indictment is an accusation. A wanted poster is a call for help. An arrest is a door into court. Proof happens there. And as this case moves, remember the center of it is not a list, a bond amount, or a docket. It's a little boy named Noel, whose ordinary life stopped leaving traces. The point of a trial is to speak for someone who cannot. What you're about to hear is drawn from real reports, interviews, and court documents. Listener discretion advised. The wanted poster did its job. The reward got attention. The international calls were answered. A mother accused of killing her son is no longer a face on a screen. She is back in a Texas jail, charged with capital murder and unlawful flight. That's the visible part. The quieter part is what comes next, and what it should mean for the child at the center of all this. Noel, 6 years old, medically fragile, and missing since the fall of 2022. When a fugitive is captured, it's tempting to call it closure. It isn't. There is no body. There is no gravesite. There is no medical examiner's chart to tell a jury what happened in a small shed behind a small house. What there is a file. Interviews that place a boy growing thinner, clinic records that stop, photos that never arrive, searches and purchases that don't fit the life of a child who needs constant care. In a no-body case, absence becomes evidence. The question for a court is whether that evidence, taken together, leaves room for reasonable doubt. The question for the rest of us is simpler and heavier. How did a child disappear long enough for the story to become international? Start with what is fixed. Officials say Noel wasn't seen after his mother gave birth to twins. Relatives and neighbors asked for a welfare check. 2 days later, his mother, her husband, and 6 of her children boarded a flight to India. Noel did not. Months later, a grand jury indicted her for capital murder. A federal flight warrant followed. Interpol posted the red notice. And on July 1st, she became the 537th addition to the FBI's 10 most wanted list, with a reward up to $250,000. In late August, she was located overseas, returned to North Texas, and booked into the Tarrant County Jail on a bond set high enough to hold her in place. Those are facts on paper. They matter because they guarantee something else will happen, a public reckoning under oath. That reckoning won't be a television moment. It will be a calendar, arraignment, discovery, motions that sound technical but decide what the jury hears, which statements are allowed, which photos are too prejudicial, how to explain cadaver dog alerts, and a newly poured patio without turning science into spectacle. Every ruling narrows or widens the road to a verdict. Every ruling also decides who gets to speak for Noel when he cannot. The moral reckoning began earlier, the day people in his orbit said out loud that they hadn't seen him in months. If you're looking for lessons that live beyond a single courtroom, take the ones that do not need a judge to sign them. A medically fragile child who abruptly disappears from clinics. A caregiver offering shifting explanations about where he is. New construction over ground that will later be searched. Siblings who travel abroad while the one with the most needs is left behind. None of those facts alone prove a crime. Together, they are a set of lights on a dashboard that should be impossible to ignore. That is where the rest of us come in. If you are a neighbor, you don't need certainty to make a call. You need concern. If you're a clinician or teacher or social worker, you may be a mandated reporter. You already know what to do when a child drops out of the routine that keeps them safe. If you are a friend, you can ask a harder question and stay long enough to hear the answer. In the United States, you can call or text 1-800-4A-CHILD, the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline, 24 hours a day. If a caregiver is being abused and that abuse is spilling onto children, the National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-799-SAFE. Use the numbers if you need them. Share them if someone else does. There's another kind of prevention that belongs to institutions. Probation departments can tighten how high-risk households are monitored. Courts can move faster when a medically fragile child stops appearing for care. Agencies can sync their checklists so "we didn't know" is no longer an acceptable sentence in meetings that decide a child's fate. These changes will not bring Noel home. They might keep the next child from vanishing into a silence so complete that a poster and a bounty have to do the work that neighbors and systems should have done first. For Noel's family and for the city of Everman, the capture is still a turning point. It says there will be a courtroom and that questions will carry consequences. It says this investigation did not go cold just because the trail stretched half a world away. It says his name reached rooms where budgets and priorities are set. And the answer was yes. It still leaves the hardest piece undone: finding him. That search continues. It will continue whether or not a trial can proceed without a recovery, because justice is not only a verdict. It is a boy who deserves a resting place and a community able to say goodbye with certainty. If you've stayed with this story across borders and hearings and headlines, remember what matters when the cameras move on. The point isn't a list or a reward or even a dramatic arrest on the tarmac. The point is a child who needed routine more than most and got chaos. A child who needed appointments and got absence. A child whose life should have left traces everywhere and then didn't. Say his name. Keep him at the center of how you talk about this case. Build your outrage into something useful in your own neighborhood. A call made, a check-in done, a door knocked on gently but firmly because it's better to be wrong and embarrassed than right and too late. This series began with a poster and a promise. The poster worked. The promise still stands. We will follow the legal path, the motions that will shape a trial, the choices prosecutors make about punishment, the rulings that decide whether jurors hear about prior conduct, and the continued search that may one day answer the only question that matters to a family. Where is Noel? When there is something real to report, we'll be here. If this victim-first coverage matters to you, please like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next update in this case. This was The Witness Record.